For those who are joining us and planning on posting anything on Twitter, we had a really good suggestion earlier from our communication team that we use the hashtag #StateSciPol. So if you could, please use that when if you're tweeting anything. Before I hand things off to our moderator for today, Nathan Phillips, just a brief recap that this webinar is a monthly webinar series that is hosted in collaboration between the National Science Policy Network and the ESEP for Engineers and Scientists for Engaging in Policy. Sorry, I'm blanking out on the ESEP Coalition. I'll post later on the chat the correct acronym unless somebody chimes in. Both of us can be followed on Twitter, and we also have our own websites online. And since we have a full panel we have 5 panelists as well as a moderator today, instead of introducing bios, we're going to skip straight over to allowing Nathan to introduce himself, as allowing the other panelists to introduce themselves briefly as well. So Nathan, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Avital, and thank you everyone for coming. It looks like we have 34 total participants, so a great group here. And feel free to use the chat. You know, you can put your pronouns down, your name, and maybe which state you're connecting in from. That would be an interesting thing to look at. So again, my name is Nathan Phillips. I'm an ecologist at Boston University, and in 2014, I was a fellow in the California legislature through the CCST program. I was in the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee, and that experience really changed my life and career. And so now I'm working in Massachusetts to develop a fellowship program for the state of Massachusetts. And I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. So I'm just going to state who they are, and then we will have them say a few words about a little more about who they are. So we are honored to have Debbie Stein, who is the president of Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Analysis and Education. Adam Jones is a program officer in science with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Anna Delenson is Senior Program Coordinator in the Science and Politics Initiative of the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. We have Rachel Owen, who is the Director of the Missouri Science and Technology Policy Fellows Program, and Anna Hagstrom, the inaugural Science and Technology Policy Fellow with the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering. And so what we'll do is we'll have each of our panelists just say a few sentences about themselves and what they're doing, and then I'll cover the flow of our webinar after that. So maybe we'll start with Adam.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yes, my name is Adam Jones. I'm a program officer at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. We're in Palo Alto, California. I've been with the foundation about 4 years. Prior to that, I was a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow in DC, working at the State Department for 2 years in the European Bureau. And at the foundation here, I work on a couple of different life science initiatives, as well as funding our science policy efforts, which include support for CCST and then also some AAAS placements. And then I'll talk in a minute about our involvement in the multi-state collaborative replication effort with other state policy fellowship programs.
Excellent. Welcome, Adam. Debbie.
Yes, hi, I'm Debbie Stein. I'm now an independent consultant, but in my former life, I spent most of my career in DC. I was at the founding director of the Merzion Fellowship Program and ran it for its first 10 years. And I was also worked in Capitol Hill for the Graduate Research Service, for the White House, for the Office of Science Technology Policy, and then I was a professor of practice at Carnegie Mellon. I've had all sorts of fellows, particularly the AAAS fellows. I was on selection committees. I had fellows at OSTP. And so I've always been very passionate about the fellowship programs, and I've been trying to get one started here in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm now located. And part of the reason I'm here is to kind of tell you the story and what we've learned, and in terms of what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. Rachel.
Well, hi, thanks for having me. I am here in Columbia, Missouri, and I run the Missouri Science and Technology Policy Fellows Program. I just finished my PhD in soil science in the spring, and I got into the policy world through a few different experiences. I've been able to go to DC on several occasions to advocate for agricultural natural resource policy, and then also found my role into this organization serving as working on state and national affairs in higher education and graduate education. And I was one of the co-founding members of the Missouri Science Technology Policy Fellows group while I was getting my PhD. And I can talk more about this later, but our program was founded by PhD students, and I'm excited that I now get to do this full time.
Fabulous. Awesome. Good to have you. Anna Delenson.
Hi, I'm Anna Delenson. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator at the Science and Politics Initiative at Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers in New Jersey. So we're the folks that are running the Science and Politics Fellowship in New Jersey. So I'm a trained neuroscientist with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and autism being the subject of my doctoral research. Prior to joining Eagleton, I worked as a biomedical research consultant at the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence. And as I said, we are at Eagleton, and we're trying to build and run this new Eagleton's latest initiative that explores issues in the intersection of science and politics.
That's so exciting. Thanks so much, Anna. And Anna Hagstrom.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my video is not working today, but I'm Anna Hagstrom. I'm the inaugural Science and Technology Policy Fellow through the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering. And as a case fellow, I'm placed in the remediation division of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, primarily focusing on emerging contaminants and especially a class of contaminants called PFAS or PFAS. I finished up my PhD in environmental engineering back in November. From January to April, I was a Mirzayan Fellow at the National Academies down in DC, and I started up here at DEEP back in late April.
Fabulous. Welcome, Anna and everyone. Okay, so in terms of the structure and flow of the webinar, here you can see the slides are put up. Hopefully people can see that. We're going to start with a kind of a overarching view at the nationwide level from Adam and Debbie. They'll take about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Then we're going to drill down into specific efforts at a couple of state programs with Rachel and then Anna Delenson. And then we're going to talk about Anna Hagstrom's experience as a fellow at the state level. That'll be about a 10-minute portion. And then we'll open it up to discussion of the obstacles, the opportunities, and other considerations in outreach, coalition building, and structure of programs. And then hopefully we'll be able to reserve a good chunk of time, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So let's dive right in, and I think we're going to start with Adam with a kind of a nationwide view of these programs.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. And I am just going to keep my remarks kind of brief because I certainly want to save time for questions and not ramble on too long. I think when I was first approached about participating in this webinar, it was thinking about the origin of the kind of multi-state collaborative effort, but I decided to just go back a little farther to think about how the Moore Foundation got involved in state policy fellowships in general. And I defer to Nathan to talk about his experience working as a California fellow. But from a funder perspective, I went back to 2007. This is before I joined the foundation, but just to see what people were thinking about when they were scoping out a potential fellowship program. So looking at our original interest in this area, it was pretty clear to folks even then that from a California perspective, where we're located, just the growing number of complex policy issues that required significant scientific and technical knowledge for informed decision-making, yet seeing a pretty stark lack of skills in those areas, specifically in the legislature within California. So there was discussion about how fellows could make a difference. This was based largely on the AAAS program that's been going now for close to 50 years in DC. And I know there was some work to scope a program based on how that was set up. But what I think ended up happening was looking at how it resonated with us as a funder. We do a lot of work in California as well as nationwide, but so much of it is in California. And regardless of the issue, California policy had an impact on all of the work that we do. So we had to go through a process of thinking about how, as a nonprofit, this isn't a lobbying or advocacy exercise. It's not advocating for a specific position, but trusting that having scientists in the government in general will help lead to better outcomes because you're informing policy with evidence and data. So it's been really a pleasure to be at the foundation for the past 4+ years because I was able to jump right into work on this program. It was interesting joining here because I didn't know of the foundation support for fellowship programs, but we've been supporting we're the main supporter of the CCST Fellowship program since its inception. And we support AAAS fellows each year. So we have fellows in DC we support too. So in the past year or two, we've been kind of reflecting back as the California programs continued to grow. We're seeing a growing demand for fellow placements year after year by the Senate Assembly and the committees within the California legislature. 54% of fellows that are hired after their fellowship concludes are hired in California legislature or state agencies. We've seen over 1,000 bills, hearings, and other actions affected by the fellows in California, which is a combination of kind of promoting the good pieces of legislation and other actions and preventing the bad ones from going ahead. And then I think what's also been really exciting is that CCST, when they took on this program, it wasn't a topic they had direct past experience with, but the fellowship merged from being a kind of a nascent effort to being a flagship for the organization. And we've really seen that take root in the last couple of years, because in addition to over $10 million of philanthropic money they've been able to raise since until 2018, they received last year $350,000 in support from the state government, and then this year over an $11.5 million that came out of a state budget surplus. So the folks there really saw the value of this program that's emerged over the last 10 years and wanted to make sure that it can continue far into the future. So it's expanding for the first time this fall from 10 legislative placements to add an additional 5 in the executive branch offices, and those are still to be determined. But really exciting to see how this has matured and served as an example for other states that you're all knowing now are looking into scoping programs. So in terms of replicating in other states, I noticed in our own literature kind of internally that we started a collaboration back in 2013 with the American Society of Mechanical Engineers to explore replicating in other states. But this kind of took off after I joined in late 2016, early 2017. We had this continued discussion. We had an early partnership with the Simons Foundation in New York to run a small call for proposals from other states to see who was interested in potentially pursuing a program that yielded 9 states that received small strategic planning grants to think about programs in their own states. And then even the states that applied and didn't receive initial funding still stayed involved in discussions. And that's kind of evolved into a monthly discussion group that continues today. And I think it was accelerated by a couple of workshops we had at the AAAS annual meetings, one in 2017 in Boston, Massachusetts, and then in 2018 in Austin, Texas, where we've had state representatives from each state come and talk about their shared successes, challenges, and fundraising endeavors. And then also additional funders beyond just the Moore Foundation have also attended these events and phone calls to hear more about what's going on. So exciting to see what's happening there, as well as, importantly, the additional momentum from groups like NSPN who are thinking about this more at the early career stage. And it's exciting to see all these other states that are popping up on the radar that are thinking about it. And then we're very excited to see some of these new programs that have just been shaped in the last couple of years, like New Jersey and Connecticut, starting to take off. So I'd say we're kind of at this inflection point where it was kind of a struggle for a while, but now we're seeing more states added all the time. And once more funding is allocated from different funders, we're excited to see where this goes. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions now or at the end.
What a great summary, Adam. And that segues really wonderfully into Debbie and talking about the multi-state initiative. Unless there's any other questions at this point, maybe we'll take them at the end. Okay, Debbie, take it away.
Okay, great, thank you. So if we could go forward to my slide. So One thing that we have really learned as part of this group that's been meeting every month for the past several years is that every state is different. So that, you know, although one model might work in California, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in every single state. So if you go to the next slide, but there are some sort of key elements that at least I think we have figured out are that you need to do at sort of this very initial stage if you're thinking about setting up a program. So if you look in the bottom corner there where it says like a volunteer bottom-up champions that are supported by top-down leaders. So all of us that initially started with the program, just say like Nathan and myself, we do this like basically on a volunteer basis as a side job, so to speak. So even when I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, Nathan's a professor as well. This is something that's a side duty. So it's not something that, anybody's going to pay you to do. So if you're interested in doing this, then just realize it's going to be something you're doing as a volunteer activity. It's unlikely somebody's going to say, hey, let's go and start a state science technology fellowship program from the top. It really is something that generally is coming from the bottom. And then what you have to do is try to get support from your top-down leaders. And that could be lots of different kinds of organizations. That goes to the next part, which is sort of a nonprofit organization home. So that was actually part of the challenge we had in Pennsylvania, for example, and that we don't have anything like the California Council on Science and Technology. We don't have an Academy of Sciences. And so it's taken me a while working in Pennsylvania to try to figure out what might work. I was inspired an awful lot by the Rutgers example, which we'll be talking about shortly, where it was a state university. So I was at a private university at Carnegie Mellon. It was a very hard sell there, but I think state universities, it's easier because they really have a mission of sort of serving their states more than a private university. So you need to try to think about who that home might be, because there are only so many places that have state university, almost every state has a state university, but not everybody has sort of a state academy of sciences, sort of basically like where Anna Hagstrom is located. The other part is you need to have some sort of liaison within the state legislative. So sometimes these are in the assembly or the legislative branch, and sometimes they're also in the executive branch, or sometimes it's both. So that's sort of something that you have to consider is, are you going to try to do both, or are you going to try to do one or another? My personal feeling is that the legislative branch needs expertise the most, but it's really the executive branch that has funding. So you have to kind of think about that aspect of the issue. And then ultimately you have to have all these things in place as you try to look at funding. Sometimes funding comes from a regional foundation, but with the states I'm working with, for example, which is now Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and hopefully Ohio is going to come into the mix. I'm talking with them now. They don't always have regional foundations. Like West Virginia, for example, doesn't have a lot of regional foundations to rely upon. If you're lucky, you'll have a state legislature champion, which is what the case was in New Jersey. And then sometimes with state agencies, it sort of depends on the economic times. So it's these sort of four elements that you have to, that are interrelated to each other, that are the core aspects that you need to put together to really get a program started. But it's all related. So for me, in order for me to send a proposal to, say, a foundation, I need to have somebody in the state legislature willing to like give me a memo or a letter or something to say, yes, if you get fellows funded, we are willing to host them. And again, I need a nonprofit organization to say, yes, we are willing to be a place where the money will go through to pay the fellows. And we need then people to really, leaders really, who care about this issue to fund it. The other sort of challenge, I think sometimes, and I found this the other day when I was talking to someone, who was not in science and technology, which is the case for a lot of these folks, is they have no idea, for example, who AAAS fellows are. And so, or even who AAAS is. And so part of it is, an educational activity to explain to them what fellows do, what contribution they make, and that kind of thing. So that's sort of things you need to think about in terms of starting out a program based on, at least my perspective, of what's happened with all the different states so far. So go to the next slide. So here's where we're at. So we have 3 states that currently have fellows in place. So California, which Adam talked about, that's what I call the Cadillac program. It's been around for 10 years. The Moore Foundation has supported it. And then it has just received additional funding to add 5 more fellows. So they're now going to have 5 in the Senate, 5 in the Assembly, and 5 in executive offices. So they have a lot of great resources. The very first workshop we had, they went through a lot of details as to all the things you need to think about in terms of setting up a fellowship program. But overall, we have to keep in mind that they have a lot of extra benefits, and they have a lot of universities. They have a relatively well-funded legislature that meets all the time, and it's something that we can aspire to, but it's not necessarily going to happen right away. Then we're going to hear about Connecticut's fellow, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But Anna's their first fellow, and that is through an Academy of Science. So, and that is an executive agency. And then we have New Jersey, who they have a champion, a physicist legislator, who actually spoke at the AAAS meeting that we had this last time in DC. And I found him very inspirational in terms of what it is that he's done. So these are sort of like 3 models that we have now to sort of look at where they've been able to get all 4 of those elements in place. So if we go to the next one. So these are programs that have been able to get at least some funding, and they, as a result, have now scheduled to have fellows in this upcoming year. In other words, they're going with a 2020 start date. Massachusetts, which is Nathan's program, and they've been able to work with their legislature, getting a resolution passed and so forth. Missouri, they were working with one of the regional foundations, and they're also looking at a multinational activity. North Carolina was from a student group. One challenge with student groups is that sometimes the students graduate, and then what happens then? In this case, the North Carolina folks were able to transfer it to the state Sea Grant program, and they are now taking over the program, and they are getting it started again with this 2020 start date. And then same thing with Virginia. So Matthew Ossaw was on the call. They've been working independently and are planning to do the shorter program, have several fellows, and do a summer program. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that you don't have to do a year-long program. I've been looking, for example, at 6- and 9-month programs to maybe keep it a bit more affordable, and also because we're looking at legislators who do not meet year-round. The West Virginia legislature, for example, only meets for 2 months. They still do things during the off time period, but there might be things like that to try to make the program a bit more affordable. Let's go to the next one. Oh yeah, Nathan, you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to do a little time check here. It's do you want to just wrap up very quickly and we'll move on?
Well, I just one more set, and then that's it.
Okay.
And then I have one more thing. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, then we have Idaho, and they have a tri-state initiative where they have the 3 major universities. Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, that's the one I'm working on, where we're trying to get these 3 states working together. And I'm hoping that will begin in the fall of next year, if we can get funding together. And then the states that aren't approved but are working with other states are Illinois, Iowa, and Kansas. Then if you go to the last slide here, this is our LinkedIn page. And so if you're interested in keeping aware of everything that's happening when applications open and everything else, just go to this State Science Technology Policy Fellowship Program interest page, and that's where we will post all that information. So that's it, Nathan.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. And I think we'll make this available to everyone on the call, right? Yeah, that tees it up perfectly for a deeper dive into specific efforts on programs in states. So we'll start with Rachel, and then Anna Delenson will follow. So Rachel, take it away. Let us know what's happening in Missouri.
All right, great. So I like the triangle that Debbie showed. It gives me a really great structure to be able to talk about sort of how we got the program started in Missouri, meeting all of those different components. So I mentioned earlier that we were founded by 3 graduate students. So this was an idea. We had heard about the efforts that were happening in other states back in 2016, and we decided that we wanted to explore if it would be possible in Missouri. California, they put together a really nice guide for if you want to start a state level fellow. And so we kind of dug into that and started looking for opportunities to see what we would need to do, who we needed to talk to in order to assess if a program like this would be viable in the middle of the country. You'll notice that with the exception of Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas, which we're working with those states, but there's no programs really in the middle of the country right now. And so we sort of saw that as a really great opportunity to figure out how this was going to look in a part-time legislature with a mostly conservative General Assembly. So we originally found our home at the University of Missouri. So they have sort of been able to incubate our program. We currently can accept grants and work through them as our nonprofit home. But we're also in the process of establishing an independent 501c3 organization. We also don't have an organization comparable to CCST in Missouri, nor do we have an Academy of Science that advises the legislature on scientific issues. And so we are filing to be an independent nonprofit, so that way we can start to fill that space and grow over time. We received our initial seed funding from a regional foundation, the James S. McDonald Foundation, and we're continuing to seek funding through other regional and national foundations, as well as through our state budget. And then, yes, through our state budget. And then I guess that last component of the triangle that Debbie showed was legislative support. And I just want to stress how important it was early on for us to have partners in the legislature and in some of the executive branch agencies. So one of the first steps we took when we established our organization was that we formed an advisory board. On that advisory board, we had a member of both chambers and a Republican and a Democrat. And they were early champions for our program. So we spent our first 2 years going down during the legislative session and seeking signatures on a letter of support. And we were able to walk into offices and be able to say that we had Senator Rowden or Representative Kendrick as a member of our advisory board. And that automatically gave us a little more credibility when we went to have those conversations. When we received our first seed funding, we had about 20% of both chambers had signed on to that letter of support. And so that was how we approached getting some of that support. We also have 2 members, 2 executive branch agency directors on our advisory board as well. So moving forward, so I mentioned we got our initial seed funding. So we plan to hire 5 fellows starting next summer. So in February or March, we'll be announcing the call for fellowships. And then we'll have our fellows start September 1st. We have a part-time legislature, and so the fellowship will be structured a little bit differently than how some of the other states have structured theirs. So the 5 fellows will be placed in the legislative branch. They'll start before our legislative session. So our legislative session runs from January to May. During that time, they'll sort of be acting as legislative staffers. So they'll be in Jefferson City working on producing content that can be given to legislators to help assist them in understanding the science behind bills. When they're not in session, they're focused on on a couple different things. So first, we think it's really important that our fellows be trusted messengers of information. And so because we're a new organization, we're working to build our reputation in the state, we want to spend a lot of time on building relationships, and we want the fellows to be able to travel around Missouri, get to know the different legislators in different parts of the state. So that way, when they're bringing information for educational purposes, informational purposes during session, that they're a friendly face and they're someone who's a trusted source of information. So our fellows will get the opportunity to learn more about Missouri and learn about the people and the players making decisions in our state. And then the other thing is that we anticipate that the fellows will be paired with a mentor at a university in the state who will be, and during the time when they're not in session, they'll be able to focus a little bit more in depth on a specific issue. So for instance, this last year, the governor had a task force on flooding that had occurred in the spring. And so it may be a possibility that our fellow would be placed as the sort of science advisor to that task force and would work with a faculty mentor at a university, and they would work on putting together science to support the efforts of that task force when they're not in session. So we are really excited about the fact that while we have a part-time legislature, we'll still have full-time fellows, because we think that gives us a lot of opportunities to really provide some resources for our legislative branch and executive branch agencies that don't currently have a lot of access to science and technology.
Fabulous,
I'll
thank
leave it
you.
there.
Okay, that's really exciting to hear. Let's shift to New Jersey and Anna Delenson.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. So I wanted to give everyone a brief overview of what our program is like, since we already have our inaugural class of 4 science fellows. They began their training in July here at Eagleton, and then that was followed immediately by their placements. So we're in the first year of this program, and we're calling our fellowship Eagleton Science and Politics Fellowship, and that is to reflect the Institute's mission to providing opportunities for scientists to become civically engaged and to understand government, its structure, the people and its processes, and at the same time, of course, infuse scientific expertise into the decision-making process, just like all of us want to do. So as Debbie mentioned, the New Jersey program has had a champion in state legislature. His name is Assemblyman Andrew Zwicker, and he happens to be a physicist. And it was with his help that we received funding for the first year of Science Fellows from the state budget. The great news is that our governor recently signed next year's budget, which included support for this program. What in practical terms means that we have funds for the next class of Science Fellows. Now I wanted to share my screen, and I hope it's going to work. All right, can you all see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. So our program is a year-long, full-time fellowship for scientists and engineers that have a doctoral degree. So that could be a PhD or a professional degree in medicine or pharmacy. The Science Fellows placements are based mostly in or around Trenton, which is the New Jersey capital, with some events at Rutgers University, which is located in New Brunswick, about an hour drives north. Now, the fellowship year begins in July of one year and ends in July the year after. And the applications for the new class of Science Fellows will be open this November. And we plan to start the selection process then in late January through March, with final notifications being sent in April of next year. So as a fellow, we often get asked, potential fellows often ask us whether they will have to be responsible for finding their own placements. So our team will actually work with the governor's office and legislative leaders to identify a position where your skills would be most needed, although it is possible that you would work on issues outside of your expertise. Therefore, skill transferability is highly beneficial. Right now, we have 4 fellows, 3 are in the executive branch. We have 1 in the Department of Health working on newborn screening program, Department of Transportation. There we have a chemical engineer who's working on resiliency of transportation assets in face of climate change. And we have a molecular biologist in the Medicaid office at the Department of Human Services. And we also have a legislative fellow that's working in the Assembly Majority Office on a committee rotation. So in July, prior to the beginning of the placements, the Institute organizes a week-long summer training here at the Institute in New Brunswick. The training really is designed to prepare the science fellows for their transition, because it is a transition, right? From your role as a scientist into those in government. And here's an example from this year's training that we prepared. So the fellows will learn about New Jersey history, government structures, processes, how New Jersey laws are made, what are some of the key power players. We also visit the State House, where we get a tour and meet staff from the Office of Legislative Services. We also host sessions on party structures, campaigns, elections, how the state budget works, and we also invite policy analysts and lobbyists from various interest groups to come and talk to us. We also have individuals from Rutgers that come and talk to us about Rutgers state and federal relations. In addition, we have a session on press and media landscape, which we find is very important so that the science fellows understand the press and media landscape and what the sort of proper conduct is when they're interacting with journalists or reporters. We also do a day of hands-on science communication exercise where the science learn about the different types of communication in government, such as memo and brief writing, for example. So shortly after that, the fellows begin their placements, so they complete a professional development plan that contributes to the nature of programming throughout the year. And that is designed to help fellows prepare for yet another transition where they leave the fellowship and prepare for whatever is next in their career. So at least once a month, we get together with the fellows to do an informal check-in, and that's followed by an event that's usually informed from their professional development plan. In addition, Rutgers University, as well as Eagleton Institute of Politics, and our latest effort, which is Science and Politics Initiative, we host a number of events that could be of interest to the fellows. So they're invited to those as well. And then we also offer a travel stipend for our fellows, which they can use to attend conferences and additional trainings. And last but not least, the science fellows are supported by stipend. And because they're affiliated with the university, they're not employees, however, they're affiliated as a postdoc category. They have access to a number of benefits and resources from the university, such as specific health insurance plans or database and library access, which we have heard has been really terrific. So, as I said, our next application period will open in November. And if you're interested to be notified, or if you'd like to learn more information about our fellowship, please visit our website, eagleton.rutgers.edu. And then we're under Centers and Programs and Eagleton Science and Politics Initiative. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. And now we're going to flip the lens and hear from Anna Hagstrom about the experience as a fellow at the state level. And then we'll move into Q&A after that.
Great, thank you. I'll try to not take too long so we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So like I said at the outset, I started up here at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP, back in April. And so my fellowship was specifically advertised as a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship with a placement at DEEP and a focus on emerging contaminants. In organizing the fellowship, CASE, the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering had approached a number of different state agencies, as well as the state legislature, to see if they would be interested in hosting a fellow. And here at DEEP, there were a couple of staff members who I now work with who had been trying to get more initiatives focusing on this specific contaminant class up and going. I think a constant theme in state government, at least here in Connecticut, is that there is never enough time and there are never enough people to do all of the things that you would like to do. So here at DEEP, they saw hosting a fellow as a great opportunity to both strengthen connections between science and policy, and to kind of bring in some external expertise and take advantage of, well, not take advantage, but leverage a fellow in starting new initiatives. So this was not something that I had studied specifically as a graduate student. My research was more focused on materials design and solar technologies, but I had a background due to my coursework that allowed me to easily understand the literature in this area, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to stretch myself and get beyond what I'd been working on as a PhD student. So as I said, I started in late April, and the program began with a 3-day-long orientation. This took place partly at CASE, where they brought in panelists to discuss science communication, among other topics. And then there were a couple of days of orientation where one of the mentors that I've been assigned, who was a previous deputy commissioner here at DEEP, showed me around the Capitol building, for instance, and kind of gave me an overview of how the legislative process here in Connecticut works. Then after that 3-day orientation, I started up here at the very end of April, and for a while did a lot of background reading and meeting with my mentors / bosses here at DEEP. I work really closely with an environmental analyst in the remediation division, and also with the assistant director of the remediation division here at DEEP. The three of us together form basically a 3-person team focused on PFAS. And so what we've done here has ended up ramping up unexpectedly due to the release of 40,000, well, actually around 20,000 gallons of firefighting foam to a river in Connecticut back at the beginning of June. This firefighting foam contains high concentrations of the sort of contaminant that I'm focusing on here, and this has generated a lot of public interest. That section of the Farmington River had recently been designated wild and scenic, so it's an asset that the community really values. And so unexpectedly, PFAS has been appearing regularly in the news cycle here in Connecticut ever since. And so largely as a result of public interest and new attention, Governor Lamont set up an interagency PFAS task force back in the beginning of July. This task force is co-led by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Department of Public Health. We had our first meeting back at the end of July, and we just had our last of 3 meetings yesterday. This task force also set up 3 specific committees that are focused on different aspects of the many, many issues associated with this class of contaminants. One committee focused specifically on human health. That was led by the Department of Public Health. The second committee focused on pollution prevention, and the third focused on remediation or environmental cleanup. And those two were both co-run by DEEP, and so largely organized by myself and Ray and Shannon, the two coworkers who I mentioned. And so as part of this effort, we've ended up putting together and delivering a number of presentations. And the primary task of this task force is to write up an action plan for the state. So a Connecticut State PFAS action plan. We presented our first draft of this plan to the task force yesterday, and I was able to take a large part in the writing of that plan. We're continuing to revise that, and it's due to be published for public comment on October 1st. At that point, we'll have a 2-week public comment period, and then we'll have 2 weeks to revise that and get it back to the governor by November 1st. So that has been taking up, I'd say, the lion's share of my time here at DEEP, but it's been really exciting, and I've been able to participate in meetings with a really broad variety of stakeholders as a result of this task force process. So I think that it's given me a lot of valuable insight. Outside of task force work, I've also attended a couple of conferences, attended many meetings, both within DEEP and outside of DEEP, been interfacing with researchers at universities in the area to help organize a couple of initiatives, and I'm looking forward to being able to interface with the legislature when session starts back up in June. In January, sorry. Like most states, Connecticut has a part-time legislature, and it alternates in long and short sessions. So this next session is a short session, so it will run from January to April. And as a result of our task force efforts, I know that there will be a number of related legislative proposals that will be started within the Connecticut General Assembly. So I hope to be of assistance there as well.
Excellent. What an amazing experience and an example of how legislative priorities can shift very dramatically, and the experience going through that. So thank you so much. So let's move right into questions and answers for the panel. And I see Danielle DeCrema has asked a question, and it's a big component of the bigger science policy fellowships is networking events. And I think that's in large part because we recognize how important that is. What are some of the approaches by your groups to generating opportunities for your fellows to cultivate networks for their fellows? Anyone want to take a stab at that from the panelists?
Yeah. Hi, this is Debbie. Part of the reason I'm been interested in a tri-state activity is so that we could have some of that kind of networking interaction among the fellows from the 3 states. Right now, between Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, there's already a lot of interaction. Students from each of the 3 states might go to universities in the other states. And so, like when we're talking about things like monthly seminars and all these other kinds of things, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to sort of create a cohort for those kind of networking activities that might be across state lines because of the interaction in the states.
Anyone want to add to that?
Well, I can echo what Debbie was saying. One of the reasons why in Missouri we were interested in starting conversations in Iowa, Kansas, and Illinois is so that our cohort could have more interaction with other fellows. But we also have made sure that we've budgeted a lot of similar things to what Anna talked about making sure that the fellows have funds to be able to attend events and conferences within the state, making sure that they have professional development resources to go to national conferences and interact with people who are working in these positions nationally. And so we're trying to make sure that our fellows have a network of not just other fellows, but also people nationwide who are going to be future employers or people within the state who are also going to be a good professional network for them to have in their careers.
Great, and that also just brings up that there is the NSPN Annual Science Policy Symposium, November 1st through 3rd. So if we could just go to that last slide so you can just see that information, that's another wonderful way to network. Let's see here. I think there's another question that came up.
I just want to add on to that question.
Please do.
So New Jersey has been trying to determine some of the synergies that we can take advantage of with other sort of functioning programs around us. And Anna Hagstrom being in Connecticut, we communicated with the Connecticut program, and Anna participated in, I think, 2 of our 5 days out of the 5 days of our program. So that's another way how fellows can take advantage of programs they're running in neighboring states. And we hope to do that next year as well, in addition to opening our professional development programs to science fellows from neighboring states.
Fabulous, thank you so much. Carly Reagan says, for those running state-based programs, how do you select your fellows? What skills or qualities will you look for in a well-prepared application package? What a great question. Who'd like to take that?
I can add to that if you'd like.
Sure.
So first of all, we have a selection committee so that we get sort of that diverse opinion of what a great candidate is. And while we don't look for previous experience in policy or politics, we definitely look for the passion that should come through in either personal statement or recommendations.
Excellent.
The only thing I would
add to it, please.
Yeah, so for our state, one of the things that we'll also be really looking for is for a fellow who can be open-minded and able to have conversations with people who aren't necessarily going to receive the information well in all situations, or who aren't going to use the science. So they may want the information but aren't going to do anything about it. And so we want to make sure that we have fellows who understand the realities, or who can really work with those realities and be able to still thrive and contribute to our General Assembly.
Well put. Melody Tan from Texas asks, if you're working on starting something from scratch, where would you start focusing your efforts? Funders, nonprofit organizational home, volunteers, state legislators, executive office, home? Where would you start?
Yeah, so this is Debbie. So I was sort of facing that challenge. I think to me the key is finding that nonprofit home. Because if you don't have that credibility, that where you've talked somebody into being your host, then it's hard to do sort of the other things. Now, that being said, it needs to be more than maybe one person, right? So you do need to have, like I think Rachel said, you had like 3 people or something like that. So it needs to be more than one person. So that part still needs to be there. But I don't think you can do the funders or the executive office aspect of it as much until you have some sort of home.
Fabulous, thank you. Just a time check. We got about 5 more minutes. Is there any other burning questions? Okay. Avital, would you like to wrap up? Do you have any announcements to make about the upcoming event or other opportunities to get involved?
Thank you for cycling back to check in on that. I definitely can talk a little bit more about that, but I do want to just have one wrap-up question or two, if I may.
Absolutely.
For folks who are on the line, and I'm very pleased to see that we had so many people who stayed till the end. Thank you, everyone. For folks who are on the line who are interested in programs that are in the same state that we have people present today, as well as perhaps states that are in very close adjacency to them, is it all right with the panelists that we instruct them to reach out to you and for guidance on how to get involved or how to start leveraging their outreach? What would be the best way to reach out, or who should they be reaching out to?
I think, yeah, this is Debbie. I think the best way to reach out is through the LinkedIn page, because that way they can sort of get multiple answers, and then other people can also sort of see the response. People do reach out to me, and I do have conversations with folks. But I think that, and I don't mind doing that, but I think that is, I mean, I'd like for these conversations to start taking place there, so that, there is a record of those conversations, like the ones we have here. They're good examples of questions that people have. And then, we'll be answering it for a longer period of time. But the slide deck that I have does have email addresses for people about specific state programs and what will happen there. If you want to, like, say, reach out to, say, Anna from New Jersey, who I see is pictured there.
Yeah, absolutely. Our emails are in Debbie's presentation. Thank you for including that. And I encourage anyone to either reach out through that, or, as Debbie mentioned, on LinkedIn page.
Yeah, and same for me. Please feel free to reach out. Either way. Sorry,
this is Anna. Same thing for me as well. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about my experience so far. So you can reach out by email or by Twitter, and I'll also check in on the LinkedIn page. And
just as an example, like Melody, because I know you're in Texas. We did have the meeting, the AAAS meeting in Austin, and the Texas Academy of Sciences, was at that meeting, was our host. And for the first time, when I sent out the announcement about a monthly call, I got a maybe from the person at the Texas Academy of Science. So to me, that's the best person, Melody, for you to contact, is the head of that society, head of the Texas Academy of Sciences, because they're really going to be the one with the most credibility in terms of starting a program there. So that to me is sort of like, because we have this long history, for those of us who've been working on this for quite a while, we'll know those kinds of things that, it's not something that you can just necessarily like look up. Maybe we can help make connections, those kinds of things.
Well, speaking of connections, I'm really just very excited about this webinar that we just had, because I feel like we've had these two realms, this state level multi-state initiative and the NSPN, and both have been moving ahead, and we've really made an excellent connection here. So I think it's kind of a breakthrough moment. And I counted 17 states on the line, 44 participants or panelists. So really exciting to see this network grow and strengthen. And so with that, I thank you all for being on the line, and we'll hope to connect further going forward. Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.